many of us are actually ready for 2023 to be over? Show of hands? Oh, okay. I heard some groans. Particularly this week between Christmas and New Year's can be really tricky, right? Very interesting feeling. I know for me, like my body has consumed so much hot chocolate and so many cookies and so much eggnog, and it's wondering, like, Jake, is this our diet now? Is this what we eat? Are you Buddy the Elf? And my brain has seen so much football. It's just like, are you getting paid for this? Is this part of what is this? Is this a career of some kind? Or maybe you walked in here today and you saw our Christmas decorations still up, and it reminded you about the Christmas decorations that are still up at your home, and maybe it added some stress. But no, this is here for the opposite effect. It's here to relieve you of stress and to normalize it. It's okay. In fact, get rid of that stress. Just leave your Christmas decorations up as long as you want, okay? That's the message today. Thank you very much. No. But when it comes to New Year's and our New Year's resolutions, this idea about even having a resolution can be very divisive. Like, how many of us in this room think, well, resolutions are a good thing because, hey, if we set an intention at the beginning of the year, even if we don't fully meet it, at least we're trying. How many of you feel that way? Okay. All right. We'll see how this goes then. Well, then how many of you are the opposite, where you think, nah, forget resolutions. All they're good for is filling up my gym parking lot for 2 or 3 weeks in January? Okay. How many of you kind of feel like you can't really plan for much because how are we supposed to know what, life is going to be like in the new year? Yesterday I was looking at this picture that I was a part of that was posted to social media on New Year's Eve of 2019. And the caption said, 2020, it's going to be the best year yet. And we all know how that went, so. But like it or not, the end of the year is this really interesting time and space for us to reflect on the past and think about what our hopes are for the future. In some ways, it's a liminal space. It's a window. It's an in-between type of time because the new has not yet arrived and the old has not yet left us. And yet when we're in these in-between spaces in life, there's something very potent and something very fertile about these times. And so today, I just want to provide a couple different perspectives on what it might mean to look into the new year and have a resolution going into the new year. And also talk a little bit about what our resolution is as a community going into 2024. And the first thing I want to point out is that the word resolution is a re-word. And if you had joined us earlier this year, you probably noticed that we did a series on the re-words. I became a little obsessed on the re-words. You probably got to a point where you were tired of hearing about the re-words. And so today is going to be a reprise of our re-series. But if you weren't here for our re-series, basically what it was about is that you and I, we all build things, we believe things, we participate in systems and organizations, and yet that prefix re means again. And so when it comes to those aspects of our lives, there are moments where we look again, or we think again, we revisit, we reimagine, we reconstruct, we rebuild. And so when we think about resolutions, we might think of it in this context of having this prefix of re or again. And so resolutions comes from the word resolve, and that word comes from the root word of the Latin solvere, which I am not able to solve in this moment. It's okay. There you go. Solvere. And this word essentially means to loosen, to untie, or to settle. So when we think about the challenges or the problems that we are approaching with our resolutions, the things that we would like to resolve in our lives, we might think of it like a shoe tied a little too tight. And that to resolve it, to have a resolution towards something, is to really invite some looseness, to invite things to settle, to invite things to open up. See, for how many of us, when we look at our lives and we look at some of the challenges and the problems and the difficulties that we face, it feels like something that is just a bit too tight. Maybe there are aspects of your life that don't feel like they're flowing. Maybe aspects of your life that don't feel fully settled. How many of us have had a problem throughout our lives that feels like it would just not resolve? When I was a kid growing up in Southern California, every summer we'd have a very serious ant problem. A-N-T. There's nothing wrong with my family ant. She was fine. The insect. And so what we would do is every summer when this would happen, we'd kind of try a couple different things as if we hadn't tried them before, but every year we're hopeful that it would work again. So the first step would be that we would use some chalk. How many of you have used this as a method for ant control? Chalk? Nobody? Okay. So apparently if you draw like a square of chalk around ants, there's nothing they can do. I don't know if it's like voodoo or chemicals or whatever, but there's something about chalk that keeps ants in. But of course the ants would find their way around, or they would get too confident. So the next thing we would do is we would put out cornmeal. Okay, and apparently if you feed cornmeal to ants, they bloat and then they die. So essentially we were carbo-loading these ants. But again, they were just like, thanks for the cornbread, like we're good, And so then finally we'd put out traps, and then of course they laughed at us and we're like, you think this is our first time? Okay. So at the end we just have to sit down with the queen and kind of negotiate, and we ended up kind of being like, you can have the living room, we don't really use it anyway. But see, the thing is, sometimes there are problems that if we come at them from enough different angles, we try enough approaches, sometimes we can find a solution. But often there are these challenges that we face where we must ask ourselves, is this really a material issue or a spiritual issue? If I were to zoom out, would I find that it's not really just about this obstacle I'm facing, but it's how I'm showing up in this situation, how I'm approaching this problem. And so today I just want to talk about 3 different perspectives that we might apply when thinking about our resolutions this year. And the first is this. What if to have a resolution is to loosen our grip? That we know that this word essentially means to loosen. And how many of us have felt that when we loosen, when we relax, when we surrender, when we let go, that often solutions arise? Albert Einstein said, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. So if a problem arises in your life that makes you full of anxiety, full of kind of a desperate energy, I need to fix this, I need to resolve this, it's probably unlikely that you are going to fix that situation by adding more anxiety and adding more desperation. You probably have guessed this, but I'm not a very handy person. And what tends to happen in my life is I'll break something, and then I'll get really anxious about the thing I broke, and then I'll try to fix it, but really not knowing how to fix it, I'll just be really anxious about it, and then I'll usually make it worse. And so there was this one time where I was changing a light bulb in my car, which has now been totaled, so RIP to that car. But I was changing the light bulb, and I had never opened the hood. I'd only had the car for a couple months, so I hadn't really opened the hood. And so I went to go close the hood, and it wouldn't close. And so I started to panic immediately. And in my panic, I decided that I could try to become an impromptu mechanic. And so I kind of found the latch, and I thought, okay, something's wrong with the latch. But I didn't have any tools, so I just found a rock, and I started banging on the latch. Again, don't try to solve your problems with the same energy that created them. So then I couldn't figure that out, and obviously the rock banging didn't do anything. So I drove it to a mechanic, and seeing my anxiety, they couldn't figure out what was going on either. So I basically drove it home, and I was like, all right, I guess my trunk's never going to close, and it's going to rain and destroy my car. And then I just had this brief moment of clarity where I thought, maybe there's just something wrong with this picture. Maybe I've just approached this situation the wrong way. And so in my moment of clarity, I lifted the trunk up, and I let it, I lifted up the hood, and I let it go, and it closed. And I realized, that's what it's supposed to do. I just didn't do that. I just didn't do the thing that it was actually made to do. The solution had been in front of me the entire time, but in my anxiety and my desperation, I was just just like taking rocks and driving to different places trying to get it fixed, totally missing the simple, easy solution that was right in front of me. And so many times in our lives, these solutions, these paths forward are just hiding in plain sight. And it's actually when we loosen up, when we relax, when our bodies can relax, when our minds can relax, that solutions tend to arise. So maybe this year, if there's a habit you're trying to get rid of or a habit you're trying to implement, maybe instead of saying, gosh, I really need this, and if I don't make this work, or if I don't get rid of this habit, I just don't know what I'm going to do. Maybe instead of that mindset, what if you said, I trust that the way forward is actually already there. It's already right in front of me, and the more I relax, the more I loosen my grip, the more I will naturally allow it to arise. Second perspective, sometimes we don't resolve so much as we transcend. Jesus in John chapter 16, verse 33 says this, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. Now, for most of us who probably know some context of where this verse fits into Jesus' story, we'd probably realize that when it comes to culturally and politically, Jesus, in some sense, did not overcome the world in a material way because he was killed, right? And so when he says, I have overcome the world, we must ask ourselves, maybe he's not so much talking about a physical overcoming, but an overcoming that relates to our spiritual lives, an overcoming in regards to our consciousness, our way of seeing and perceiving reality. And in that sense, you and I can participate in a similar type of overcoming. How many of us have heard some version of this quote from Pierre Teilhard de Chardin that says, we are not human beings having a spiritual experience, but spiritual beings having a human experience? Probably heard something along those lines, right? What I love about this perspective and what gives me so much peace about this is because it reminds me that whatever our human problems are that we face, our human issues, our human obstacles, our human difficulties, we can place them within a much larger context, that what our lives actually are, who we actually are, is so much larger that it gives us a sense of scope for what we're dealing with. I have a friend who works in the corporate world, and so in his job, he's often faced with these really stressful situations where maybe there are people that owe him hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars at time, like they owe his company, or maybe his company is being told that this other company thinks that they owe them. And so it can be this incredibly stressful thing involving all this money. And so it can be this really difficult, heavy burden on him. And he was telling me about how recently he was talking with some colleagues, and they were asking him, like, how are you doing? This seems so stressful what you're going through. How are you faring right now? And he said, yeah, it can be incredibly stressful, but he picked up his phone and he showed them a picture of his granddaughter and his newborn grandson. And he said, when I look at this, I remember this is my life. This is who I am. And I think sometimes, friends, we need reminders, things that put our problems in their proper place. Maybe this would be a new word for you today, but things that take our problems and re-perspectivize them, okay? How often do we need that? So many times when I use the word spiritual, what I mean is taking my human difficulties and just putting them in their proper place, re-perspectivizing these things that often take so much of our time and so much of our energy. And now, don't get me wrong. Sure, when we're talking about, millions of dollars and people's jobs and people's lives and all these different things, or whatever it is that you're facing, yes, these are very real things. These are very real struggles. And I in no way am diminishing that. But it's also important to remember that these are not the only things that define you, that who you are is so much bigger. And so this year, I would just challenge you that maybe you're saying, I don't know what the path forward is in my life. I don't know how to get through this challenge. And I would just invite you to ask, maybe the path forward is actually realizing there is more to your life. There is more to who you are than this particular obstacle. Maybe it's not about resolving it so much as transcending it. And the last perspective is sometimes not solving is a form of resolving. So what if our resolution might be to let go of having a resolution? Do you remember the game Whack-A-Mole? I feel like sometimes life feels like that game where you have problems arising, different challenges, and you're like, oh, I got that one. Oh, and then another one pops up out of a different hole, and you're like, okay, I can do that one. And then, another one pops up, and you're just constantly putting fires out. And certainly life can feel like that. But I think we also have this thought in our back of our minds that one day, eventually, they will just stop. That if we just keep playing that game long enough, it'll end. But I think that is a bit of a fantasy because life is problematic. And as Jesus said in that verse, in this life, you will face troubles. In our existence as humans, it is guaranteed that we're going to face challenges. We're going to face trials. How many of us have found that even if our life situation was relatively easy and relatively problem-free at a certain point, that we still found ways to invent some kind of problem? I know this is true for me. There's actually this theory on why you and I have allergies that, to me, presents this fascinating perspective on how we tend to amplify the problems in our lives. And the theory goes like this. 1,000 years ago to 10,000 years ago, our immune system developed to fight all kinds of biological threats in the environment. And then, fairly recently, we invented something called Lysol or Purell, and we began to sanitize our environment. And yet our immune system did not catch up to this new reality. So instead of saying, oh, we've gotten rid of all these biological threats, our immune system says, no, there must be something wrong with us and our ability to detect threats. So let's crank up the sensitivity. And at that point, things like dander and pollen now become seriously irritating. Now, this is only a theory, but I think it provides a really fascinating look at how we perceive our own lives. That maybe there are moments and experiences in our lives where we're not facing life-threatening or life-altering circumstances, and yet we still find a way to have anxiety, maybe about what could happen or what might happen. Or maybe, if you're like me, you fixate on relatively small problems, because in lieu of big ones, you need something to fixate on. There is an award for having anxiety over relatively, inconsequential things. I would put myself up for consideration. It is award season, so. But I want to share this quote with you. Mark Manson says, "A good life is not a life without problems. A good life is a life with good problems." What are good problems? Maybe good problems are those that inspire us. Maybe good problems are those that actually add meaning. So maybe you're at a point in your life where you're pursuing something, a dream, a passion, and in that pursuit you face obstacles. But are those obstacles a bad problem? No, they're a good problem because they're a reminder of what you're actually putting forth into the world. Maybe in your relationships, you're trying to open up, you're trying to grow, you're trying to become more vulnerable. And that effort and that work actually brings up some difficult things. It brings up some hard stuff for you. But that's a good problem because it means you're trying. It means you're showing up to your own life. Or maybe you lead a spiritual community and we're coerced into starting a fantasy football league. And surprisingly, you make it to the finals, and today is the day that decides if you win or not, and you're a little anxious about that. That's a good problem. And Aldea, as a community that is attempting to do something really unique in the world, that is attempting to create a spiritual space of which there is not many in this country and in this world. Yeah, we face some challenges. We face the difficulty of trying new things and not necessarily having a lot of resource and allies all around the world. And yet that, my friends, is a good problem because it reminds me of the importance of the work that we do. So this year, when you look at your life, I wonder if you think about your resolutions, instead of saying, what would my life look like without these problems? I wonder instead if you might say, these problems are a side effect of a full and fulfilling and meaningful life. That these problems are actually an indicator that I'm living. When it comes to the good problems of this community, I want to share that we were included, just over this past few weeks, an article was published that we were included in, and it's called Church for Nuns. And it's about a few communities that are attempting to do a spiritual community for those who identify as not affiliated with a particular religion. So if you want to check this article out, it's on religionnewsservice.com. But it really talks about what we're sharing today, that there is a good problem of trying to figure out how to build community in this new way. And it reminds me of, that verse in Matthew, the harvest is plenty, but the workers are few. That sounds like a good problem to me. And I'm reminded of, our efforts and our pursuit into building community. And for me, it's been this kind of realization that as much as I love gathering here on a Sunday morning and having amazing music and reflecting on our lives together, I also am reminded that simply gathering on a Sunday isn't what fully builds community. Because to truly build community, we need to create a sense of belonging and authenticity, and that can get messy, it can get raw, and so we need all of us to show up and co-create this community together. And so next week, I'm really excited to start a new series called True Community. And in a lot of ways, this encapsulates our resolution going into 2024. That it's one thing to have a community, and it's another thing to be actively building it. And in that sense, I don't think community is simply a problem that is solved, meaning I don't think we get to a point where we can say, oh, we've built community and we're good and that's it, and we don't have to be thinking about this anymore. But it's something like all the other words. It's something that we return to again and again and again. Because to be a healthy community doesn't mean that we just establish that and it's over, but it means that we are continuing to be introspective, to look at what it means to actually build this kind of community. And I want to share this quote from an author named M. Scott Peck, who wrote a book called A Different Drum, and it's on this idea of community building, and a lot of this next series draws from this book. And he says this: no community can expect to be in perpetual good health. What a genuine community does do, however, because it is a contemplative body, is recognize its ill health when it occurs and quickly takes appropriate action to heal itself. See, friends, no community and no human being can ever expect to always be perfect, or can ever expect to never be out of alignment. This is just reality. But what we can all do is take responsibility for ourselves and for the communities that we are a part of. And I love that he uses this word, it's a contemplative body, because really what he's saying is we are looking within, we're being curious, we're asking ourselves, hey, are we just going to keep doing what we've always been doing, whether that's within the context of community or our own lives, or are we going to actually be willing to inquire within and say, hey, how are things going? How are we doing? And individually, we have this opportunity to do that. And today really is as good of a time as any, seeing that it's New Year's Eve. For a New Year's Eve benediction, Aldea, as we approach our challenges this year, may our grip loosen like the untying of a tight shoe. May we remember to re-perspectivize our problems. But since our problems are inevitable, may our problems be ones that bring meaning and inspiration and hope. And lastly, may we send off 2023 in gratitude, inviting in the new and the unexpected and the inspiring. And whatever the year has for us. May we remember that we get to choose how we're going to show up in 2024.